Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fun filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we wish a very happy birthday to Sammy Hagar, who's been around for a while, but if anything, he seems to get younger with age. But before we sort of go into why I think his musical legacy and his current musical activities are so important and so fun and frankly so inspirational, I want to talk about the inspirational elements that relate to his life because Sammy Hagar has one of the most interesting, most uplifting, and really, frankly, most inspiring stories in all of contemporary music. Now, Hagar was born in a poor part of California in 1947. He was born in Salinas, but lived in various places that the road took him. And what was most notable about his family is that it was filled with violence, it was poor. And in spite of all of that, he always looked for the best in people and for the best in life. He was someone that at a young age had this sort of inherent optimism, even though the situations around him were incredibly violent. And he never let those define his personality, and he never let those situations define how he would treat others and how he would look at his own life. And I think that that is very important. A lot of times we get so caught up in what the people that own this world want us to think about that we forget that just staying alive in a world owned by such people is the greatest achievement of all. And if you can do that, if you can stay alive in a system that wants you not to be, if you can persevere in a system that wants you to give up, if you can reach for the top in a system that wants to keep you at the bottom, and if you can be creative and inventive in the context of a system that wants to make you an obedient servant, then you're already ahead of 99% of the world's population. And that's frankly such an important message that I take from Sammy Hagar's young life. Now, you're asking, well, how do I know about this? Well, one, Sammy's been very open about his life, and he's not one to either romanticize it, sentimentalize it, try to make a big deal out of it. He's just very honest, and I think that his honesty in a world of made up celebrities is very important. And he wrote about it in his book, which is also now available on Spotify as an audiobook. Whether you're into reading or listening, one way or the other, I really recommend that you check that out because he goes into these details, obviously in a far better way than I could, and he does so from the perspective of someone not sort of looking back on the past in a sort of woe is me sort of way, but in a manner that really gives people hope that if they were born to be kicked, you don't need to stay that way. You can be honest about it. If you're being kicked, if you're being held down, admit it, but then find a way to get up because while it's unjust that some people have the youth of Sammy Hagar and some have the youth of, I don't know, someone called Hunter, the fact of the matter is justice comes from, in my view, two places. It comes from believing in a higher power, number one. And number two, it comes in actually doing whatever you need to do to improve your life, to improve yourself, even to just improve your mentality. Because before you can improve any of those other things, you've really got to improve your mentality. And that's what Sammy Hagar did. And he knew from a fairly early age that music was his calling. He loved music and he was willing to basically give up on everything else that he maybe could have explored to pursue music. And like most musicians, it isn't easy in the early days. But then he ran into Ronnie Montrose, a very, very talented guitar player who himself was in many ways the opposite of Sammy in terms of personality. While Sammy always exuded optimism, while Sammy always tried to do as much as possible, Ronnie Montrose was the kind of guy who didn't really work nicely with others. But beyond that, he was sort of someone that was very haunted by his own demons. For decades. And years later in the 2000s, it eventually led to him taking his own life. So, a very, very different way to both begin and end one's life than the way Sammy Hagar continues to live his. But musically, it was a wonderful partnership. On the way to Ronnie Montrose's house, Sammy was inspired to write the lyrics to Bad Motor Scooter, and they jammed on the song. And that became the first song by the band Montrose, which they co founded. And that band, it had success. It would have probably had more success if it was marketed better. But for the people who really liked hard rock played with a virtuosic guitar player and some wonderful melodies and great singing, it was one of those bands that was a cult classic. People loved them who were really in the know. And Ronnie Montrose, of course, went on to other great projects. His solo album, Open Fire, a jazz fusion classic. The work that he did with Tony Williams and Brian Auger, absolutely amazing. His other major band that he formed in the early 80s, Gamma, every album a classic. And one of the big fans of Montrose was actually Eddie Van Halen, who happened to tell Sammy Hagar, this one, Sammy, as a solo artist, shared the same bill with the Van Halen brothers, either in the late 70s or early 80s. So it's funny how that unexpected meeting would come back to sort of define musical history too. But because of Ronnie Montrose and his ability not to, work well with others, he fired most of the band, and that included Sammy, but he was totally undeterred and he went to pursue a solo career. And the first few albums of his solo career, they sold respectably and they had some good tunes, but Sammy knew that the production style wasn't really to his liking, even though there were some classics on albums like 9 on a 10 Scale, the self-titled album, Musical Chairs, Street Machine, and Danger Zone. He was really someone who was gaining more acclaim and credibility through his live performances than through his work on record. And obviously the live performances were and are great. Sammy's one of those musicians that is old school. He toured in every single city in as many places as he could to get audiences to know him, because in the days before social media, either you had a record company that forced everyone to know you, or you played like hell. Clubs, theaters, arenas, eventually you play in every gig in every town, whether you're at the top of the bill or the bottom of the bill, and eventually people will get to know you. They'll buy the records, they'll start requesting your songs into radio stations. That was really how the pipeline tended to work for bands that didn't immediately have loads of commercial support from the record labels. But the album that really sort of broke Sammy through was released in early 1982, and this was his Standing Hampton album. And this album had a production style that was more to Sammy's liking. It was what I would call hard melodic rock. And his previous albums had a very similar style of music, but the production was almost more pop rock as opposed to hard melodic rock. Might seem like splitting hairs, but when you listen to those first few albums and then compare it to Standing Hampton and what he did after that, you'll really be able to tell the difference. And this album was just chock full of hits. I'll Fall in Love Again, There's Only One Way to Rock, iconic song, Heavy Metal, iconic song, Sweet Hitchhiker, really, really good song. The whole album really produced well, no real duds on the album, and he kept going from strength to strength from there. Later in that same year, he'd released Three Lock Box, and the title track to that I love, Remember the Heroes, which is really about veterans. Really powerful, inspiring song. Wonderful. And I think you'll sort of know that this sort of attitude that I've been talking about, this optimism, this perseverance, this respect, this confidence in oneself, but humility and respect to those who deserve it. That's really in a lot of Sammy's lyrics. And a lot of people have said, oh, well, Sammy's lyrics aren't his strongest suit. But listen more closely, and you'll find that while it might not be sort of postmodern poetry, it really is stuff that inspires and uplifts. And to do that effectively and to do that memorably takes skill. And Sammy absolutely has that skill. Your Love Is Driving Me Crazy, another really good one. From that album, I Wouldn't Change a Thing is a great one. really, really strong album. He continued to tour more and more, and the venues that he played in continued to get bigger and bigger. In 1984, he released VOA, aka Voice of America, and that contained the hit that would come to not only break him big, because that had really already happened, but this broke him huge. And this was the song that's sort of the official international anthem of anyone who's ever got a speeding ticket. And this is the track I Can't Drive 55, with an iconic music video to match it. Everyone loved it. Everyone still loves it. The song VOA, another classic, with a hilarious music video. Absolutely hilarious. So be sure after you've watched this stream to check that out. And it was also around the same time that there was a temporary supergroup formed, which was kind of a harbinger of things to come. And this was the Hagar Schroen Aronson Schrieb, or HSAS group. Say that three times fast. They only released one album in '84 called Through the Fire, but it's a really great album. And the members of the supergroup, obviously Hagar on guitar, Neil Schon. He wrote most of the stuff with Sammy Hagar of Journey, of course. Kenny Aronson, who had played bass in Foghat, and Michael Shreve, longtime Santana drummer. So you've got two Santana alum on this album. And it really was a good album. I kind of wish they did more. What the musicians had in common was their connections to the Bay Area. And who knows, maybe they'll get back together. They all remain friends so far as I can tell. But this band was almost a harbinger of what was to come, because by this time in Sammy Hagar's career, as what was now a pretty mature solo artist, he had already played with two of the finest guitarists in music, definitely the finest guitarists in rock, and that was Ronnie Montrose and Neil Schon. But the most famous connection that Sammy would have to a guitar god would come up in the following year. And I love this story. I'm sure a lot of you have heard it before. Now, David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen did not like each other. They disagreed on everything. And some say Dave was fired. Some say he said, I quit, man. We'll never probably know the truth. But by 1985, Van Halen, which had just come off their top selling album, 1984, I don't know why it was named that, they were looking for a new lead singer. Now, both Hagar and Eddie were big Italian supercar drivers, and they had a repairman who was working on Eddie's car and Sammy's at the same time. Eddie said, I'm looking for a singer. And he said, well, call Sammy, who wasn't actually looking to join a band. Sammy was coming off of his biggest solo hit. He was doing well, and he had pretty much had enough of bands following Montrose. He was happy just leading his own outfit as a solo artist. But fate would have it that he was invited up to 5150 Studios at Eddie's house, and the rest, as we know, is history. Now, Sammy would have been famous even if he didn't join Van Halen. And Van Halen, I think, would have worked even with a very different kind of singer. But when you put them together, they were just a really good fit. And it was probably because, unlike Roth, Sammy was a pretty accomplished guitarist of his own. So the songwriting process of fitting the lyrics and the vocal melody on top of the songs that Eddie would write, it tended to be a lot more harmonious between the two of them. And Van Halen as a band didn't miss a beat. 5150, released in '86. Some would say their finest album. I mean, every album was sort of their finest album, really. And I've said that before when we were celebrating Eddie's birthday, fortunately his posthumous birthday. Just was that last week? He was born on October 6th. I don't remember when the previous live stream was. But anyway, their birthdays are both in October. How interesting. And the band just went from heights to heights. OU812, released in '88, a huge hit. And the success really translated into the '90s. Van Halen were one of the few survivors of bands that were big in the '70s and '80s that survived this weird transformation between very uplifting melodic rock pop music of the '80s to the 90s era, when rock started to get very dour and grim and, as they say, grungy. But Van Halen, undeterred, they continued, resting on their considerable laurels. The For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge album was released in '91. Wonderful album, and one of the best produced albums in all of the Van Halen catalog. And then in 1995, they produced Balance, really good album. But Several things happened to drive Sammy out of the band. There was a manager that died who had sort of held everything together, and some people started to insist on, the old Chinese whispers into people's ear. This one said this one, and that one said this one, and everything sort of goes to hell. Which is why Sammy eventually parted from the band. Apparently, Eddie told him, "Well, you've always been more of a solo artist anyway, so why don't you just go back to doing that?" Which, for a firing, is actually it's actually a pretty complimentary way to fire someone by saying, "Oh, you've always been a solo artist." Well, thanks, I was a successful solo artist, which he was. Now, while all of this was happening in the 90s, Sammy's greatest personal success was brewing, if you'll, or fermenting, I should say. I don't know what the proper term is. So in the 80s, he fell in love with a sleepy beach town in Mexico called Cabo. And he decided to open up a sort of a bar and club and restaurant there. And the original idea was just to give Van Halen a fun place to play. And the brothers and Michael Anthony were initial investors. Eddie got food poisoning or drunk the water or something happened. And he thought, well, this stupid idea will never work. And so Sammy bought back the whole thing and became the owner of the whole thing. And he started making his own tequila. And that ended up becoming huge. It ended up making him a billionaire or multimillionaire. I don't remember which one, but at that point, who's counting? He is very successful. Now, a lot of people would say, well, why does celebrating business success? What does that have to do with music? It has a lot to do with it in the case of Sammy Hagar, because throughout his life, he did things that the system, the people who own these societies, wanted him not to do. He broke away from an abusive childhood because of a drunken father, and the system is designed to keep you locked into it. He broke away. The system is designed to keep you from realizing your creative dreams. He pursued creativity first as a member of Montrose, then as a successful solo artist. He didn't even let getting fired from a rising rock band like Montrose ever get him down. When he joined Van Halen, he took a big risk. Going from being a successful solo artist to joining a band filled with drama is a risk, but he got the reward both artistically and in terms of record sales. And Van Halen went to bigger and bigger heights. Then getting fired from Van Halen and having the resilience to go back to a semi dormant solo career and really becoming one of the most in demand rockers of his age, aging gracefully, keeping things fun. And that, again, not very easy to do. So, what does this have to do with the eventual huge success of Cabo Wabo? Well, in the early days, no one believed in it. His own bandmates gave up on it. There were problems. There were people who stabbed him in the back. There were corrupt people that he had to deal with, but he kept on pursuing it. Even though in classic Spinal Tap fashion, the original plans were for a much smaller Joe Biden moment, folks, facility, but because he was writing the things down in inches, feet, yards, and the person reading it was expecting centimeters, millimeters, and meters, it ended up being a lot bigger. And again, this is after Spinal Tap, but it is, great comic realities do coincide. And there were so many obstacles, and yet the Cabo Wabo brand became a huge success. And there are now Cabo Wabos in other places. This helped him to launch another tequila brand, a rum brand, restaurants everywhere, and in airports. And in his airport restaurants, and I think maybe in some of the others too, but don't quote me on it, all of the profits, once all the bills are paid and everything's taken care of, all of the profits go to local charities. He doesn't work with national or international ones. He wants to work with charities where he can speak to the people and see directly where his donations are going. Children's hospitals are a huge part of that. And I just think that it's wonderful that he does it. He is someone who's balanced the ability to continue his business empire thriving and philanthropy while keeping all of the wheels in motion. And because the music industry has changed so drastically since the days of Montrose, let alone the days of Van Halen, he's now able to fund a lot of his musical pursuits. For instance, the Wabaritas, a band that he started to celebrate the Cabo lifestyle in the late 90s, they're somewhat of a dormant band, but they're still salaried for doing nothing. And the only thing he asks that when he picks up the phone and says, "We're doing a gig," they come to a gig. The same is true with his band, The Circle. He's been in other super groups like Chickenfoot. He's just someone that keeps on playing. And in an age where streaming has taken all of the revenue out of recorded music for many, the fact that he brings live shows that are so energetic and so fun to people around the world is really something that I think has helped him to keep going. And the businesses are helping the shows, and the shows help promote the lifestyle. He's always been someone who's been inspiring insofar as he's never been afraid to learn from the success of others. It was in the 90s that his wife Kari brought him to a Jimmy Buffett concert, and he, coming from the world of hard rock, was thinking, well, what am I doing at a Jimmy Buffett concert? And he was impressed, not only with the music, but with the audience and with how Jimmy Buffett was one of the first people to really market his music simultaneous to marketing a lifestyle, complete with brands, restaurants, margarita mixes, margarita makers, t-shirts, plastic parrots, the whole thing. And that too is probably is what gave Jimmy Buffett's career such longevity, because he was able to attract people not only on the basis of the music, but in an age when record sales did what they did, he was able to attract people based on selling a lifestyle and the friendships that you make along the way. And Hagar really became kind of the second person to really do that successfully. Following him going into the Cabo Wabo in the early 90s, the hip hop industry became huge for artists who were merchandising certain lifestyles through brands. Almost every majorly successful rapper, from Snoop Dogg to 50 Cent to Kanye West, now known as Ye, and literally Jay-Z, all of them, they are selling Dre with his beats, his headphones. They're all selling a lifestyle with brands. And Hagar was one of the first people outside of Jimmy Buffett to do that, really a trailblazer. And that has helped keep a lot of artists creating the music that we love, because it helps to subsidize the music in an age where before it was, oh, I'm going to make money doing music and I might invest in a restaurant or a bar for fun. Now it's kind of the opposite. And Sammy was one of the very early trailblazers who helped to, again, this word comes up again, inspire other musicians to do that. I also think that it's inspiring that he doesn't let anything or anyone get him down. He is playing all the time, everywhere. You see him in one city one day, one country the next day, opening a restaurant here, going to a charitable event here, getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame Monday, doing something else interesting on Tuesday. And today, later today, for those of you who are watching this live, it will be in the post if you watch it later, but that's okay too. He's doing what's become an institution at Cabo Wabo, which is his birthday bash. And in true Sammy style, he invites musicians from all walks of life, every genre, to come on stage and just jam. The set list is fluid. People play what they want. The audience has a great time. Free drinks for all and all of that good stuff. And because it became so popular over the years, he's doing it on several days. There's sort of a pre-birthday show. There's the show on the 13th. And this year he even did pre-birthday shows at the Cabo Wabo in Las Vegas that he recently opened. So in an age where people are either retiring or past their prime or just giving up on music or losing audiences, Sammy continues to retain and frankly grow his very loyal audiences, who know that when you go to a Sammy Hagar show, you are going to leave with a smile on your face. And I consider that not only an artistic achievement, but I actually consider that one of these many personal achievements that I find so inspiring from Sammy Hagar, because it's one thing to just tell people who know things around them kind of suck that they suck. It's another thing to put a smile on their face and inspire them to maybe look into why this guy is so happy and what we can do to get ourselves out of this rut, or at least try to do so. A truly inspiring figure. And for someone who really never wrote a political song in his life, I mean, there are arguably Right Now, which is one of the best Van Halen songs ever, the lyrics to that. But in general, he stayed away from that. And yet, he has probably inspired more people to uplift themselves and those around them than a lot of people who just bash you over the heads with politicized lyrics. And I think a lot has to be said about that too. Just someone who's given a lot to others because he was giving something at an early age to himself. And that thing is, he gave himself an opportunity. He believed in himself. He did not let a system designed to keep someone like Sammy Hagar gone, forgotten, deleted, irrelevant, in pain. He didn't let that kind of system define who he was. He let himself define who he is. And he met some really interesting and creative and talented people along the way. And the journey is still going on. He'll be 77 years young today. The party is in Cabo, Mexico. Maybe some of you are there, but you probably won't be watching a stream about it. If you are, you'll actually be there, having a lot of fun. So, to Sammy and his family and everyone else involved, do have a great time. If you've never been to one of his concerts, let alone one of the birthday bashes, you should definitely check it out. Everyone gets their money's worth. It's a really, really good show. And for everyone else, celebrate his birthday by listening to his music on your favorite streaming service, because why the hell not? Like and subscribe to this new channel. Share it with your friends. Share it all around. It's not easy to grow a YouTube channel, but hey, we're certainly trying to do that. And your valuable help is always very appreciated. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.